Yes, sir.
I have a son in college, and I followed the story about the UNC,
Yes.
had to read that book. And I've also been following a story about Campus Watch by Daniel Pipes, who's identified what he considers a bias in Middle Eastern studies.
Yes.
Can you comment on those subjects? Or?
Sure. I don't know that I would be able to say anything about the North Carolina case that you haven't already heard, but the thing that most concerns me about it, as you probably already know, the translation of the Quran that was chosen for this course was only the early revelations. When I first started reading the Quran, over 20 years ago, when I was at the University of North Carolina, although it wasn't an assignment, I was just reading it because I was interested, I was entranced by the early revelations. I don't think there's any point in making any secret about that there's a lot of beautiful things in there. Very appealing things. It's only when you get to the early revelations, by the way, are in the back of the book, if you read the Quran, because they put it's arranged from the longest to the shortest chapters, and the early revelations are all pretty short. Anyway, it's only when you get to the later ones, which were written when after Muhammad's initial message was rejected, that you start to get into these really disquieting passages, such as the ones I quoted and many others. And that being the case, to only give people the early ones is to give them the most attractive possible representation of Islam. And so what's going to be the result? I mean, we need to be realistic about this. Christianity and the traditional religions of the West, Judaism, are being rejected and ridiculed and discredited in the media all the time, and then they get this. Well, isn't it going to be appealing to anyone? And so is the Chapel Hill faculty promoting the establishment of a religion? Well, I think you can make a case for it, certainly. And what was the other one, the bias?
Thing. Have you heard that?
What in particular about it?
Well, he feels that the Middle Eastern studies academic programs have been hijacked by people with one view.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
And so he set up a website that identifies actions or people who have done what he thinks are very biased
yes,
talks or whatever.
Well, I just don't think there's any doubt about that. That all you have to do is, well, for example, one of the reviews of my own book in a Canadian newspaper said, in between calling me a hate monger and such, said, why is it that the lie that violence is part of Islam has gained such traction? They don't support that it's a lie. They don't give any reason to think that it's a lie. They don't address any of the things that I've just given you to show that it might not be a lie, but they just call me names and say it's a lie. And I think, well, that's pretty much par for the course from what you're going to get from most media outlets today. And that's primarily because the idea of multiculturalism and tolerance and absolute relativism, as paradoxical as that may be, holds sway, so that you can criticize the West and the Western religious tradition as much as you want, but you cannot say a word negative about anybody else's, even if they're saying it. Yes, sir.
Financial angle that counts a great deal more than we've been talking about. I mean, should we go on holding our noses and doing business with the Saudis? Why would it not have been better had a secular Saddam Hussein taken over that entire area? Let them do business with a secular controller instead of with a religious controller.
It's a good question. And there's also the question of the Alaskan oil reserves and the role that they could possibly play in lessening the dependence on Middle Eastern oil. And the Russians. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about that tax you spoke about.
The jizya.
Yeah. How's it collected?
Well, it's not really, it's advocated nowadays by these groups that are trying to restore the purity of Islam in the Islamic states. I don't think that it is actually on the books in any Islamic state today. It is? Yemen, of course. I should have known it would be Yemen. Thank you. Anyway.
One of your children contributed that instead of the tax.
Oh, well, that's a historical fact. In the Turkish Empire, as well as in the early Islamic empires that came up out of Arabia, the tax was so prohibitive that, as the gentleman pointed out over here, sometimes people had to actually give their children as slaves to pay the rate of the tax. The tax actually is based on the verse in the Quran that I quoted earlier that says, until they pay the tax and are utterly subdued. Working from that utterly subdued, the Islamic authorities elaborated a series of laws that were designed to humiliate the Jews and the Christians, so that when the tax was collected, the Islamic magistrate was instructed in some places actually to yell at them and say, "Pay the jizya," and then to hit them on the back of the head. And the ritual blow on the back of the head was part of what you had to do to pay your taxes. You couldn't just fill out a 1040 and send it in. Also, interestingly enough, the tax rate was so high for Jews and Christians that the Jews and Christians effectively financed the expansion of the early Islamic empires, such that their own condition was so miserable that a lot of them, simply to try to make some kind of a better life for themselves, wanted to convert to Islam. Excuse me, and many did, but a lot of times they were actually prevented from converting because too many converts would destroy the tax base. These are elements of history. You can look them up, but you don't hear them on in the media these days. You only hear about the Crusades, which actually started 300 years after the Islamic armies started to press into Christian areas, and ended, 300 years before, rather. Let me say that again. The jihads started 300 years before there was ever a crusade, and overwhelmed the historically Christian areas of North Africa and the Middle East. And they didn't end until 400 years after the last crusade. So you hear about the Crusades provoked this hostility between Muslims and Christians. Well, actually, the hostility was provoked by Muslims, and many years before there was ever a crusade. These are simply matters of fact. Why they're being glossed over or outright denied is, well, it's an interesting question, but it's nonetheless a fact.
You're not saying that there weren't some real horrible things that went on from the Western...
No, I'm not saying that. There were.
During the Crusades.
There were horrible things, yes. The only saying that that the hostilities stemmed from the Islamic theology that I quoted, that Muhammad said, "I've been commanded to fight against people until they confess that there's no God but Allah and that I'm his messenger." That those hostilities commenced long before there was ever a response from the Christian world. That 300 years afterward, the Christian world did respond with the Crusades, that the Crusades went wrong in many ways, and might not have been the right response in the first place, but that the jihads continued. And most importantly of all, the theology of jihad has never been repudiated. The Pope has apologized for the Crusades. Protestant groups have apologized for the Crusades. Nobody upholds the theology of the Crusades today, but the theology of jihad is still part of Islamic law. And it is still considered part of the collective responsibility of the Ummah, of the Muslim worldwide community, to make war against non-Muslims until they convert or are subdued. Now, that's not to say that all Muslims think that's what they ought to be doing, but we would be naive if we thought that that meant that no Muslims thought that's what they ought to be doing.
Where are you getting the Friday sermons from? When you're
Memory.org, MEMRI, and there's plenty more there.